Awesome. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Center of Love. Welcome to our Sunday gathering. I was going to say whether it's your first time here, but I think everybody here is a veteran of the space. So I will simply say that it's a joy to gather together with you today, as it is every other Sunday. At the Center of Love, we hold a simple but profound intention to create a community rooted in love, unity, and personal growth. This is a pluralistic community, a pluralistic space, which simply means that we welcome a diversity of voices, traditions, and approaches. What binds us together is not sameness, but a shared commitment to love as the way, the key, the answer to our woes in these unsettled and strange times we live in. To help us create this solid container for our time together, I'd like to name just a few basic ground rules. Number one, the presenter holds the floor. So when someone is speaking or sharing, we ask that you listen with your full attention. Number two, sharing and asking questions are welcome during the circle time, which comes after the talk and our little 10 minutes of practice that we do after the talk. Any ritual elements are host-led to ensure that we all move together as one. And last but not least, we practice respect, kindness, and curiosity toward one another. When we honor these agreements, we create the conditions for openness, trust, and genuine connection. And with that being said, I would like to welcome Danusha to light a candle for us today in honor of truth and reconciliation, which is coming up this week. So Danusha, if you could kindly come and do that for us, we would be most grateful. Well, all I know is there is great darkness in the world, and I will not say what the source of it is, but what I will say is I'm grateful for the light which you have lit for us today, the light of love, which is what we need right now in this world of shadows. It's going. There you go.
The 72 hours special candle. When the Armageddon will come dancing,
We have the light now, Danusha. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Keep the darkness at bay for our time together. Thank you. And of course, in honor of truth and reconciliation. Which brings us to today's theme. I think it is related. Today's theme is communication. Communication, which helps to explain the Gwen Stefani song, which we heard at the beginning, Don't Speak. If you think about it, communication is at the heart of every human relationship. It's how we express our needs, it's how we share our hearts, how we resolve conflicts, and how we come to understand one another. And yet, for something so essential, it's often incredibly difficult, isn't it, my friends? Clear communication is not easy, despite its importance in our day-to-day lives. Why is that? Well, because words can be slippery. We speak through the lens of our own experiences, and we listen through the lens of our own assumptions. Even when we're trying our best, meaning gets tangled, emotions flare up, and what we intended to express isn't always what the other person hears. Clear communication, then, is not just about choosing the right words, my friends. It's about cultivating presence, awareness, and care in how we speak, and more importantly, how we listen. In a world filled with noise and distraction, learning to communicate clearly and listen deeply is nothing short of revolutionary. It allows us to move from misunderstanding to connection, from conflict to compassion, from isolation to intimacy. And that's why I'm extremely grateful for today's presenter, Kusuma. In both her counseling practice and her personal life, she has identified some key components to practicing clear communication. Now, CLEAR is an acronym, and I assume that we will learn what each letter stands for shortly. Today, she'll share those insights with us, and more importantly, she will give us and guide us through an opportunity to practice clear communication together. So Kusuma, she is a woman of many talents, but it seems to me that reading her short bio, communication is central to all that she does, whether it's through social work, through counseling, or through helping friends navigate conflict and challenging situations. And so what I'm trying to say, my friends, is we are in very good hands today. And so I will welcome Kusuma to the stage.
Growing up in my house, I didn't learn a lot about conflict resolution in productive ways. Things in my house resulted into an escalation of conflict that would look like people slamming doors or being passive aggressive towards one another, sometimes even the police being called. So you can imagine that wasn't a healthy framework for me to launch into the world trying to resolve conflict. For most of my life, I went without expressing any feelings or any needs that I had because they would just be disregarded or met with explaining reasons, defensiveness, or anger and aggression or violence. And so approaching someone, if someone was doing something to me that hurt, you can imagine would have been very scary. It wasn't until I was introduced to the concept of nonviolent communication. Can you raise your hand if you're familiar with NVC? Great. So nonviolent communication was developed by a man named Marshall Rosenberg, who's no longer with us. It was a beautiful revolutionary human who taught nonviolent communication at a political level. He talks about a story of de-escalating conflict on the Gaza Strip and having incredible compassion towards someone who was calling him a murderer from the audience because he arrived in American trucks and Americans were supplying ammunition to the war. And so he thought, well, I need to look at the need that's happening underneath what this person is saying. And he says at the end of that story, what started with a person calling me a murderer resulted in them inviting me over for Ramadan dinner. So if something that powerful can transform something as big as conflict on the Gaza Strip, imagine what it can do for our lives on an interpersonal level. Marshall Rosenberg talks about using nonviolent communication to speak in a way that allows for compassion to arise and for us to feel heard and for the other person to feel like their needs and their feelings matter. So you can imagine if I'm going to give an example of you coming home and your partner leaving socks on the kitchen floor. And those socks have been there for 3 days. If you were to approach that partner and say, can you please pick up those damn socks? You're such a slob. Can you imagine how that person would respond? However, if you were to use some of the skills that Marshall Rosenberg teaches, which is to give an observation, state your feeling, state your need, and ask for a request, you can imagine how that could go a little bit differently. I've noticed that your socks have been on the floor for a couple of days. Not in an aggressive way, just I've noticed that it's an observation. When that happens, I feel a bit sad because I spent a lot of time cleaning the house on the weekend and I'm noticing that there's clothes on the floor in the middle of the floor. And I have a need for a clean space. I'm wondering, my request is, could you please not leave your socks in the middle of the floor? You can imagine how stating something in that way, using I statements, non-accusatory, non-aggressive statements, could result in probably a quite different outcome than throwing fuel on the fire by calling someone a slob. It changes a situation from being furious to being curious. My role in my house was conflict mediator. I became a social worker at the age of 6. And I learned how to read other people's emotions and expressions. And so I had heightened emotions or heightened senses around what was happening for other people in the house. So call that the tools that I developed to be perceptive of what's happening for other people or trauma that informed this. But I have this heightened sense of what's going on for other people. So I wanted to give a story about making assumptions and how bringing assumptions to conversations can change everything. So I live with 2 roommates, and 2 weeks ago, my roommate started to demonstrate some different ways of interacting in the house. He's normally very like friendly, and we've sat down and laughed about different movies and had great conversations. He's quite new to the house, came in July, but I just noticed a shift, that there was something happening. And he would walk through the kitchen. He wouldn't look at me. He wouldn't acknowledge me. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't saying good morning. He wasn't saying hello. I was like, oh man, what happened? Like, what did I do wrong? So I start going over the list. I'm like, okay, was it because my bunny pooped on the carpet and like I didn't clean it up fast enough? Or is it because, I said something that made him mad? So I'm going over, all of the list of things that I could have done in my head. And then I started worrying that I'm not doing enough. Like maybe I'm not cleaning the kitchen enough. Maybe I'm not, cleaning the bathroom enough. Maybe I'm being too micromanaging as a roommate. But then I looked up at the accountability chart and I realized, oh, I'm doing 75% of the housework. So it's not me. It must be him. So then I start looking and I said, well, I cleaned the kitchen last and I emptied the dish rack. And I noticed that actually when he empties the dish rack, only empties half the dish rack, not the entire dish rack. So I'm creating this entire story about how I'm justified in feeling actually upset with him, but he can't be justified in feeling upset with me. So the next day I wake up and I go into the kitchen and he's sitting there and I see on the board, empty dish rack, but he's erased to the entire accountability chart. And I think, oh my gosh, the audacity. Like, how can we know, like, how are we going to have a valid house meeting if we can't look up there and be like, look what Kusuma's doing and what you're not doing? So if we don't have the accountability chart, right? So I thought, you know what? I need to address this. I need to call a house meeting, but I'm going to disguise the house meeting as we're saying goodbye to our other roommate because he's just a subletter who's moving out at the end of this month. So we'll have a brunch and we'll, we can say goodbye to him and then, we can talk about some things around the house. So I put out a message on our thread and I wait. And I see that he's seen the message but hasn't responded, which is another one of my triggers. So I realized I need to talk to him now. I'm in the living room, he's in the kitchen, I'm rehearsing what I'm going to say. I'm going to talk to him about how I can't live like this. I can't possibly imagine being in the space, if other people are, having things going on and they're not able to talk to me about it and they're being passive aggressive. I'm going to go talk to him. And then this voice came into my head, and it was a voice from one of the teachings at a meditation retreat that I'd been on. And the voice said, remember that the distance between reacting emotionally and responding calmly is just a few breaths. So I took a few deep breaths. And I'm already kind of shaking. And I walk in the kitchen and I'm like, hi. And he's like, hi. And I'm like, you okay? And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, I mean, you just don't seem like yourself. And like, I've noticed that you're not really like engaging a lot. So just wondering if everything's okay. And he went, oh, shoot. I was really hoping that I didn't take my work home with me, but it's clear that I have. A few weeks ago, somebody passed away at work. So you can imagine how that might have gone if I'd gone into the kitchen, guns a-blazing, accusing him of not doing things around the house, accusing him of not fully emptying the dish rack, and bringing my own heightened emotion of that situation into it. What if he only emptied half the dish rack because that's all he had capacity for? Because he was really suffering with the pain of losing someone at work. So being curious and saying, are you okay? Rather than what the hell is going on with you? Very different things. And it brought about a completely different outcome to that conversation. My past experiences with my roommates who haven't actually picked up around the house have made me angry, and I'm projecting those experiences onto the present. I feel like we do this a lot, where we bring past things that have happened in our lives and we bring them into the present situation. But if we show up with curiosity and we use these skills, then we can be the change that we want to see in our relationships. It's hard sometimes when the ego gets involved. I see it happen all the time when I counsel couples. They have this feeling of like, hey, this person's been doing this. They did it last week. They did it last year. They did it the first year of our relationship, but they've never actually talked about it. They've never actually said to the person, this is what you're doing that bothers me. And so when we bring our ego into it and we take it personally, then we're bringing our own selves into the situation. And essentially, we don't see the situation. We don't see things the way that they are. We see things the way that we are. So if we can change the way that we are and the way that we come to the conversation, even if the other person doesn't have these skills, what we're doing is we're teaching other people how to communicate with us because we're demonstrating how we show up in conversations. What I'm looking for in my couples counseling sessions is if somebody comes with anger, I realize that anger is a superficial expression of an unmet need. What is the need that this person is expressing? Can we get to the tender underbelly that's under the armor that they're carrying into this session? Do they need more connection? Do they need to feel heard? Do they need to feel safe? So nonviolent communication was able to get me so far. And then I realized that some of the skills that I learned to be a counselor are actually super useful in communicating with other people. And I developed an acronym, C.L.E.A.R, C.L.E.A.R, in order to listen actively. So it's not a way to express something that is happening for you. It's a way for you to understand something that's happening for the other person. So let's say someone comes to you with a concern and they're in a heightened state and they're really emotional. We can remain grounded and exhibit these 5 things. This might give us an opportunity to hear what's really going on for that person. I'm also going to hand out this sheet as well, so it does have an explanation for each of those. So the first one is someone comes to you and they express that they're really angry that you've left socks on the floor. You can ask clarifying questions. Can you tell me if it's just the socks that I'm leaving on the floor that's bothering you? Or can you also tell me if when I leave like shoes kind of in the same space, or is it specifically the socks that are bothering you? Or if I take my socks off and put them on the floor just for a few minutes while I get kind of myself sorted, but then I clean it up afterwards, is that okay? So you can ask clarifying questions, like get to the heart of like what it is that's really triggering for that other person. L, listening. We all know what listening is, but instead of listening when we're having an argument with someone, we're often formulating our response rather than actually listening and hearing what they have to say. So just sitting and listening is huge, but you can also listen with your body language, not just by sitting, but other like, oh, okay, like giving cues and verbal nodding or turning towards that person, giving them eye contact, showing them that you're present with your whole being. Empathy, E. Empathy is really important because it allows the other person to know that we know what they're going through. And it doesn't need to be a big explanation, but you can say something like, oh, yeah, when so-and-so did that to me last week, I was super frustrated. I totally get why you feel that way. It can just be a simple thing like that. Or you could even say, I imagine that must be really frustrating. I imagine that probably caused you to feel quite sad. Allowing the other person's experience. When I was in couples counseling once, I had the counselor say to both my partner and I, you don't have to agree with how she feels. You just have to let her feel that way because she feels it and you can't argue with the way that somebody feels. So allowing the other person to have their experience, even if you don't agree with it, is super important. And then reflecting. Reflecting back is something that I do often as a counselor, but you can also use that in paraphrasing and saying, so what I heard you say was, you can even use it as a question like, I just want to repeat back to you what I heard you say so that I know that I've got it right. And then you can give them the paraphrase and then say, is that right? And then they can add more if they want to. Using C.L.E.A.R, using any one of these, it doesn't even need to be in the right order. You can just say, if you have a knowledge of what each of those means, when you bring it to a conversation, then you can pull upon one of those things. What we don't want to see is over explaining. That often happens. I don't know if it's raise your hand if you've ever brought something to someone and then they just give you a huge explanation about what they thought or their reasons for it. Now raise your hand if you felt heard and held when they did that. I had this happen with my mom yesterday. And so I wrote back and said, the need that I'm trying to express is to feel heard in what I'm saying. And we're working on it. But the tendency is to, like I said, instead of listening, we're formulating our response. We're often talking over that other person. We want them to know, no, I didn't mean to do this thing. I meant to do that thing. And you're explaining it away. Or, no, I didn't do it like that. And we're defending ourselves. So trying to get away from those things is really important. And when we offer clarifying questions, listening, empathy, allowing of the other person's experience, and reflecting, then we get into a place of being able to actually hear what the other person has to say so that they can walk away from the conversation feeling heard and held. Once you are able to listen and hear what that other person has to say, and you can see in their body language that they've gone from to because they're feeling heard and held, you can say, do you feel complete? Do you feel heard? Is there anything more that you want to share? And if they say no, they feel complete, then you can say, would you mind if I shared my experience of what happened at that time or my reflection? And would you be willing to hold space in the same way? So we're going to try and practice this together. And I just want to state a couple main takeaways here. So remembering this piece around being curious rather than furious. If you can take that justification, all the stories that you've had about what's happening and actually just be just like, what's really going on for this person, that can change everything. Be the change that you want to see in your conversations and in your relationships, because the more you show up that way, the more you teach other people how to show up for you in that way. And try not to take things personally and step out of the conversation. Sometimes I find when I'm having a conversation, and trust me, even though I've been practicing this for a really long time, you realize how enlightened you are when you spend a week with your parents. So yeah, it came up again this summer when my parents visited. And so trying to hear what she has to say from a counselor's perspective, as if they're not even talking about me, has really helped me to step out of taking things personally. Okay, we have some activity sheets. I think you guys have them up here. And so what I'd like for you to do is take that sheet and find a partner in the room and then divide yourselves up into two. When you're sitting in two, I'm going to ring the bell and you'll have 5 minutes. And what I'd like for you to do is I want you to role play another person. So for example, if Ollie and I were together, I might say, Ollie, can you be my mother? Okay. And so then Ollie, actually, hold on. Let me just think about how to phrase that. Yeah. So if Ollie in this situation is my mother, then I'm going to create a concern that I want to express to my mother. And Ollie, as my mother, is going to use clear, active listening skills to understand my experience. So I might be like, Mom, when you are yelling at someone in traffic when we're on the phone, it really gets me very anxious because I'm hearing you yell on the other line. And so Ollie might say, can you tell me a little bit more about that? Is it when I'm just when I'm like in traffic, or is it anytime I yell? And I say, no, actually, it's kind of anytime you yell, it really like brings up a lot of anxiety for me. Right. And then Ollie can listen, Ollie can offer empathy. Oh gosh, like I've experienced that too with my other people in my life. And I can really empathize with how that, I really want calmness in my life as well. And then reflect back what you heard them say. So And in the first one, you're only focusing on one person and you're using a situation that's not super heated, but think of something that you would like to say to someone and to state to the other person who they are, right? I've been wanting to talk to my sister about, the way that she talked to me at Thanksgiving. Can you be my sister? And then you're going to say something that's like a real life example for you. And that other person is only going to respond with one of those 5 things. Okay, so it gives you the opportunity to practice holding space for the other person. After 5 minutes, I'm going to ding the bells and then you're going to switch. And then just the person who is now listening is going to tell the other person now, okay, you're going to be my best friend. And then they're going to give the concerns to the best friend and the best friend is going to respond with one of the 5 or one or all of the 5 things, any combination within those 5 minutes. And then we'll have a break and we'll talk about how that landed for everybody.